Hey! Today on the channel, we're looking at Near Myths 2, the first appearance of Grant Morrison. Let's check it out! Hey comic fans, and welcome back to Dangerous Comics. I'm your host, Dane Georges, and today we're continuing our coverage of Near Myths with Near Myths number 2. And like we talked about last time, Near Myths was a publication out of the UK. Specifically, it was published in Scotland and kind of received a smaller print run. It was never really totally found its place on the shelf in the UK, and we kind of get into a little bit more of that in the editorial in this issue as well. But if you haven't seen it, I also did an issue or a video on the first issue, and I'll be covering all 5 of these that came out and making a playlist of those so you can catch up on all of them, see them all from start to finish. But we get this amazing, Graham Manley did the cover for the first issue and continues in the second. We get this amazing spread of Kramer in this desert wasteland where the story in this issue is going to take place, and just really cool colors, mixed media like on the last time. I do wonder about how it was made, if it's markers or watercolor. There's some really cool kind of Kirby dot kind of fade kind of from the green to the blue. I really like that detail. I would love to see the originals and how bright and vibrant they were, but really kind of captured a great yellow that's on Kramer and down here, and how that fades to the sand. I think that's really cool, and using that yellow again in this kind of moon or setting sun, I think is a really great effect. So we have a science fiction and fantasy comic for adults. Once again, calling out that this was for adults. This was trying to be like heavy metal, just kind of finding that same audience of saying hey, this isn't just for kids. We don't have to just be publishing Marvel and DC superhero stuff. But okay, in this issue, continuation of Bryan Talbot's Luther Arkwright. 2 Graham Manley strips. We get his Tales from the Edge, and then a new strip with the Star Run saga, and then they even kind of lean into a little bit more of a magazine kind of format with reviews of the latest from the comics, art scene, and more, which is really cool. There's a lot of stuff in there that I've never seen or read, so yeah, I'll definitely be holding these. You can definitely pause so you can read all this and everything, but I will call out some of the stuff in the editorial, and like last time, I think the editorial is really important. Just kind of gives us some context on how this was received, where it was going, just in general. So get some cool. I like this little pull out of the art as well. But so Rob King, who's the editor, he's also the publisher. He owned this Galaxy Media. Was a bookstore that he owned in Scotland, and then he started Galaxy Media Distribution, which is what he was printing this through. So he says, this is improved on number 1. They've improved on the plot. Even the lettering is a lot better in here. There is a great little moment here where there was obviously a mistake, and they had to white it out and then use a pen to fix that, the Y and U. I like that. It just kind of still has that fanzine kind of a feeling. There's even this hyphen goes over the line, and you can see that it's a cut out text. So just love kind of speculating at how they actually made this and laying it out physically. This is also there's an introduction here. A big reason why this issue specifically, issue 2, may be on people's radar. It's because it is actually the first published appearance of Grant Morrison, Grant T. Morrison in this book, and it's right here. Time is a 4-letter word written and drawn by Grant Morrison. So that's a really cool story. Definitely hang on till the end of this episode. It's the last story in this book, and I've done a lot of research trying to kind of figure out the story and what Grant was doing with it, and really has a lot of themes that Grant would then explore in their later work. So hang on for that. I think it's really worth your time, and kind of why people might be looking for this issue already. For me, I was trying to collect. I kind of have a collection going of all Grant Morrison work, so couldn't not have the first Grant Morrison published appearance, and really kind of inspired me to look at Near Myths as a whole, at all these other great artists that were in this publication. So we get the first intro of Morrison, and Also hinting that they're going to continue to do work with them. And then in issue 3, Grant's going to do this story about Gideon Stargrave, which is a character that Grant later brought over to the Invisibles. So cool little context with that as well. Also in the beginning of this editorial, we get like a little bit of Rob King talking about that they're having distribution issues. Retailers don't want to carry adult comics. There's even something in here about, he says, unfortunately, in this department, it's not the reader you have to please, but the various wholesalers and magazine buyers for the big chain stores. The main comment I have heard is, I can't understand why adults want to read comics. This explains the poor state of British publishing, and when you consistently come up against this brick wall, and also why we see so many American publications that have a good home in the market being put out cheap on the British market where circulation is not too important to them. All this leads to the next point, which is the frequency of publication of near myths, and kind of going into like, hey, this might not be able to be a monthly publication like we originally wanted because we can't really find the footing or the place on the rack for this like we thought we would, which is just really sad. And I think it does kind of point to where comics were seen at this time. So this came out October 1978, and obviously comics changed a lot even in the 80s, and big things like Watchmen and Dark Knight Strikes Again or Dark Knight Returns, they kind of changed the comic scene of like, oh, maybe these comics are for adults. So sad to see that they're really struggling like that in Scotland and the UK, that there wasn't really a respect for comics and that adults weren't reading them, and if they were just reading Marvel or DC. So kind of struggling with that, but I mean, who wouldn't want to be reading this? Flipping this thing, it's just, I'm blown away. This art is amazing, and it looks so good in black and white. I love that we kind of got a little preview like this in the first issue, but we get this amazing kind of, if you missed number 1, a recap, and how they kind of like clipped out. This is from the cover. This section is from Bryan Talbot's story. This is like a Chris Haddon story, some Graham Manley, and some Bonk down here with what have we done to deserve this? But such a great collage of this art, and I think it like really looks really good when you see it all together. Super cool. So we start off just really strong with a continuation of Bryan Talbot's Luther Arkwright, and it's chapter 2. Get kind of some of that like letter setting, like actual like mechanical type mixed with his hand-drawn type. Kind of same there. Last time they was doing the same with the time stamps would always be like set with type, and then he would do all this hand lettering. I really like that mixture of it, and what a cool splash. It's called Shadows, and you can see that a lot of this he's like drawing with just black ink and then going over it with like with a whiteout or some kind of like white media and doing all this hatching, and you can see it's in here in the chest and stuff too. But I really like that compared with just like the solid black of this silhouette and how it fades into the shadow. And then we're kind of getting a lot of this second story is a little bit slower. It introduces the world a lot more and kind of gives us this whole like multiverse story that they're doing, how like Luther Arkwright is this like multiversal agent that's going from dimensions to kind of stop these bad guys from trying to cause the apocalypse and ending the whole multiverse. And so he's stationed on Earth 00.00.00, kind of like the mecca of the universe, and they live in this like utopian society and want to try to spread that out throughout the multiverse and say, hey, if it's possible here, it can be possible for us or for everyone else as well. And so yeah, this is like a place where humanity thrives, but they fight a war with these disruptors across the multiverse. Luther he's like, this whole thing is him meditating on what has and will happen, and if their order holds any importance, just kind of like wondering what's his place in this, like how does his actions affect the greater picture, and kind of the whole thing is just being how we're shackled by destiny, and attack being the best defense, and like, is that with trying to get utopia, is attack really being the way that we can achieve that? So just these kind of like ethical issues in sci-fi story, and I feel like that's just such a great way to kind of like get these ideas across and tell a big story like that. And kind of the whole thing is like how we're shackled by our nature, and the whole thing is the contrast of sex and death, love and war, and how this cycle is just endless. And we get that throughout here as he's thinking back to the story. We're getting like some of the agents that he's with contrasted with how he was in the past in the last issue, or in another universe. And he's talking to his agents, kind of getting that, and then also contrasting with his grandfather who served in the war and died. So just the cyclical nature of it, and also just we see another view of that tableau that was destroyed in the museum of the first issue. And before the napalm attack, the tapestry screamed of the universality of human cruelty, the constant level of suffering over the centuries across parallels, so many alternatives. Some are pure chaos, some just rubble floating in space, and some worlds radioactive waste. So it just gets into like how lucky, life is to have lived, and yet still we are surrounded by horror of violence and hate, and kind of just going through time. This panel really stood out to me. Like, this looks like a Frank Quietly drawing, so I have to imagine that Frank Quietly had to be familiar with Bryan Talbot's work and inspired by it. But just that, love this kind of like open panel and this very thin kind of line art, and the little bit of ticks and marking for the flesh. Like, that's something that Frank Quietly will do. And I love that contrasted with these war scenes, which are just like heavy hatching, and like we're having just kind of like the white stands out against it. But really playing with black and white, love and hate, sex and death, love and war, all the contrasts in life, and which side are we on. Love this panel of the like the command center of Valhalla Nova. That's like the Continuum monitor screen. That's like their home base in Universe Zero. And we get kind of a little bit more about it's these guys versus I believe they're called the Disruptors, and we get this view of them. And that really stood out to me because that, like, before I ever read this, I read Grant Morrison, and this is just screams of Grant Morrison. There's so much Grant Morrison in this story, which is just interesting that this is the first issue that Grant Morrison was ever published in, because you have to imagine Grant was reading this and just getting inspired and loving this kind of work. And I know Grant Morrison has also credited Bryan Talbot as being a big inspiration on kind of their work as well. So we get a lot of that in here. But these guys look just like the Archons, or the evil bad guys in the Invisibles from the Outer Church. And so to skip ahead, it's crazy the similarities there. They just like they're kind of more in this wearing like gas masks, but they still look so like bug-like. Just you can't deny that similarity. And this is drawn by Jill Thompson. Really great. I love the Invisibles. That could be like its own whole tangent I go down, but a little graphic here. But this is you can't see this. You can't look away and not see the similarities here. So you have to imagine that this was a huge inspiration on Morrison. Once again, just like this really reminds me of Frank Quietly, or like Chris Burnham would do this kind of like hatching in there to kind of like really give those shapes and letting the white kind of stand out. And yeah, it's really great. Just kind of these contrasts of like, that's him with his grandfather, I believe. So just like similar paths of war and what that does to people. More cool mixed media here. This looks like this is like a high contrast photo of like, I think it's supposed to be kind of like all of the servers or whatever. Or it could also be, I don't know if it's supposed to be like mass graves. We're kind of looking at these as mass graves and then comparing it to this. But it also kind of looks like the 2001 Space Odyssey server room kind of thing. So they're looking at this, the whole thing just kind of contrasting what they're doing with their mission, who's right, who's wrong. There's also something that just throughout here in the lettering, and not something that I see in American comics, it's here as well. It's like anytime that there's like a pause, instead of maybe doing they also do the ellipses here with the 3 dots, but it's like not a hyphen, it's like kind of like a pause, and it's just a slash from the bottom of the letter to the top of the next letter. Not something I really have ever seen in American lettering, so I don't know, it's pretty cool. Maybe we should bring some of that back. And his lettering throughout is very interesting, how it's all just kind of like floaty with the line indicating, unless it's like over a complicated background, he'll actually do a a word balloon. And here this word balloon actually has an outline, I think, to help it stand against the high contrast photo. They're also trying to stop this apocalyptic event called fire frost, and it's like a form of Ragnarok, and so we just saw in their command center there in Valhalla, Ragnarok. There's a lot of like Norse mythology, just like mythology in general in this story, and it will be caused by this opal, this like fire opal. So they're trying to find this opal in the continuity that they're in, going to believe it's supposed to basically be our reality, our human Earth reality, to find this opal and how that's kind of connected to our Earth history as well. But they want to stop it from falling into the disruptor's hands. And then we get here this view of what is a reference to a tarot card of, it's the Wheel of Fortune, number 10. And just kind of like how, we said earlier, he's tied to destiny. Destiny is pulling him forward. This is the Wheel of Fortune. He's not controlling, or has very little control over what's happening. We also see, he's gutted here. So is his destiny to die? He's also looking over like these mass graves. The juxtaposition of this imagery is just super powerful and evocative. And just his use of black and white is so awesome. And I think you can also see that this lettering is being done with white media on the black. So you can kind of see in there's some like brush strokes as well, but super, super cool. And I'll try to pull this out for the next issue that we look at, but I do have one issue of like the Dark Horse collection of this, and obviously it was published at like comic size, and you can see what comic size looks like compared to this. So this is magazine, so they shrunk it down, and they did not adjust any of Bryan Talbot's lettering, so it just becomes kind of hard to read. This is definitely the preferred format, if you could read it in a bigger format, or if you could just read it on my channel, just be pausing this and reading it, because it's really good. But we kind of get a repeat of that first splash, kind of showing more of what he is thinking of. He's clouded by death. There's a kind of like an atomic bomb behind him, and he's getting set to go on his mission. But really great. Just, I think, gets me really excited about where this story is going to go, and the whole duality of everything, us versus them, death versus life. And without like spoiling the Invisibles, that's like exactly what the Invisibles is about as well. So gotta say that this has to be like the biggest blueprint for the Invisibles. Yeah, so keeping it going, we get some more great ads. I didn't call this out last time, but this ad, I think a few of these ads were in there last time. I love this Jack Kirby reference of like this store being called Forever People. I think it's a Jack Kirby reference to his The Forever People from Fourth World, but super cool. This is another Graham Manley ad. He drew this. So his DNA is all over this this issue and just this publication. So we had Chris Haddon in the last issue as well. This time Chris Haddon is partnering up with John Taylor as the writer. I believe in the last Near Myths, it was just Chris Haddon on his own doing some strips. So similar style. The story is just the mage is this mage guy is like putting on a game, and the sorceress puts a stop to them with this love spell. And it kind of ends with, all the guys are getting like seduced by this temptress. I feel like that's kind of like they're trying to play into some of those heavy metal kind of things, like the Bodacious Babes and stuff like that. But kind of fun contrast with this kind of goofy style with the more traditional drawing of the woman and stuff. But kind of ends with just like this ugly guy has to make her fall in love with him. Into part one. So it's a fun little story. I enjoy the kind of mania and the artwork and the Bigfoot kind of cartooning. Yeah. We'll move on to the next one, which is another Graham Manley story. Graham Manley did the cover, and this is the Tales from the Edge. I really love how they have Tales from the Edge. It's in here in like these kind of lit up signs of like this strip. It's Tales from the Edge. And I think he maybe could have made that bigger, but oh man, there is some drawing going on here. Like so much black on this page. It's just, and I think he's dotting all the windows in white, and just looking at this, I think his art is really starting to level up. Like every page that Graham Manley is doing, he's just getting better and better. I love these kind of like, this kind of like inverting this black and white of the reptile's face here. I think you can see there's some zipatone or some kind of tone added here. I don't know if it was called, what they used in UK was zipatone. That was a brand, but you can see he's using like a striped one that then he cut in for this kind of like smoky background. There's also some fading zipatone here and light zipatone there as well. This whole thing just really reminds me, like this style reminds me of Eastman and Laird, the creators of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There's something about the like quality of line and just the kind of mark making. And Eastman and Laird were using this paper that you could apply like this chemical to, and it would let this kind of zipatone kind of texture come out. There was two different kinds, and one was a dashed and one was like a dot. And I feel like Graham Manley's kind of doing a similar thing, but he's like physically drawing all this. There's like so much hatching and mark making, and it's everywhere. And so it's kind of like, I think last time I was saying how this had like the whole thing had to be Star Trek and Star Wars inspired, but this story even more feels like this is Star Wars. This is like the cantina scene in Star Wars, but it's all like they're trying to find this guy who's kind of like a cosmic detective kind of stuff. He's running from him, gets away, gets in his ship. Really cool shots of like the city, cool ship design as well. And then this guy is like, that guy totally looks like a Deathlock from Marvel Comics. So and this feels like another Star Wars character, but really great character designs, but kind of leaning into like what was popular in sci-fi of the time. Awesome chase sequence as they're blasting these cars. I love that explosion. That's some really great inking in there, like going from like these really fine lines back to like his more fat kind of inking. And I wonder what he's using there. It does feel like a fatter kind of inking tool. Great lettering as well. I feel like his lettering is a thing that's also just getting better and better. I love these like the thicker kind of letter forms like that. And his action or sound effect lettering is really good as well. But this guy gets captured. He's given a job, and then they're going to be invaded because these people are looking for him, and they're going to take the ship down. But I believe this is going to continue as well, so we'll see where the story goes. This is something that I'm just loving looking at as well. Kind of dense with the text, but I think that's always kind of something that's indicative of a newer writer as well. But their storytelling sense is definitely there. This is where we get the kind of like the magazine section of Near Myths, and this was something that was not in issue 1, but leaning into that and kind of doing some reviews of these like sci-fi publications, media review. Definitely pause this and check out what they're reviewing, what was big at the time. I also love seeing like the prices. Yeah, really cool stuff. I'll have to look up some of this stuff, see if it's even like accessible anymore, if it's really hard to find. Oh, and if you look here, there's also Galaxy Media Christmas cards. So something that you could specifically, a lot of this is probably stuff that was being carried by Galaxy Media, the bookstore. And looks like Chris Haddon did some Christmas cards that you could have gotten. Oh man, that'd be so cool to see those in person. I wonder what that printing looked like and everything, like, or how they were even printed. And then we get here to another Graham Manley story. This one is where he's teaming up with Michael Wilson. This is the second part of Kramer. This is like I said in the last episode, this was adapted from Michael Wilson's, like it was like a poetry or like prose story, and I do feel like it continues to be kind of like flowery kind of captions, but I think the real star of the show is Graham Manley's art here, and it's like I said, every page he's getting better. I think this is really cool use of splashes and how they fade to other panels. Like, so it's a panel, get the text breaking up almost as a panel, and then I love this like transition to almost like two panels in itself as well. But really great rendering on the rock formations as well, and I like how it goes from kind of going in from like the lighter section into this dark. The main story of it is that there's this valley is poisoned, and this creature is turned to stone. And so he's kind of investigating what this guy sent him off to do and what poisoned the valley and stuff. But so really great upshot, and I just think that's really cool, leaning into like this is a black and white comic. How can you show this dramatically? I think where it does start to fall apart is like these kind of captions where it says like a column of rock resting on the horizon, the summit of which served as an entrance into the cloud stained vermilion sunset. And it's just like, so it's like kind of one thing that I pointed out is like often the captions are like describing like color in a black and white comic. I just think it's something that you don't need to do. This is not a color comic. Maybe he's trying to give us another level of the story, but I just think it just feels a little unnecessary. There's a little bit of a disconnect from the art and the words, but Graham Manley is doing some amazing work on the rendering and just the kind of choices they're making in this storytelling, and just kind of using Kramer as this element to pull them out here is really interesting. And so the whole thing is that this creature, this sentinel is up here turned to stone. And we look back at this guy who sent him on the mission. Really great use of this typography, the time of shadows, and how the shadow is going over and affecting Kramer. You know, there's the shot of him looking up. Just has to be screaming, shooting at his havoc blast. And so we end on Kramer climbing up this rock formation to get to this stone creature, and he's going to use his abilities to break the stone and bring this creature back to life. And I think this is actually where the story of Kramer ends. It says to be continued. I don't remember completely, but I don't think this continues on to the other near-myth issues. But really great. I feel like he's really kind of leaning into like the bigger imagery, not as many panels. You know, he did a ton of panels on, just to contrast that, ton of panels from Tales from the Edge and then into this. And I do like the storytelling a little bit more of when Graham's doing it on his own, but I think this is a really cool exploration of how you can tell comics a little differently. And you know, if he's going to do one story where it's all panels, let's do another one where it's all like splash pages. That is really cool. Cool, like challenge to yourself as an artist to do something that different. We get this continuation, and I think I said last time as well that this has to be very inspired by like Jim Starlin. Just feels like that with these like tall, long characters as well. That is a really cool ship design. I like this kind of like use of the panel to give us like this little crescent of the planet with a couple of the like moons, like letting you know this is a planet, and then this is another panel, but kind of works as like a whole splash. It's interesting. It's like you probably could do with a little bit of a background here, but overall it's a evocative image. And so we now get a little bit more like reveal into the story. The captain is revealed to have been missing for 30 years when he took his ship into a black hole. The crew disables him because they're unsure if he is who he says he is. You know, there's some mystery in that, but we see him like getting pulled out of space and brought back onto the ship. I thought this was interesting that they use this idea of like, it's not like a black hole, it's a white hole. And I think that works really well in a black and white comic. I think that's just an interesting use of the storytelling in the media, kind of like what I was calling out against the Kramer one where they're describing color. It's like, oh no, this is a white hole. And then you can kind of just, it's like the void, the absence of anything on the page. I think that's really interesting. And so they use this white hole to travel to a planet where the inhabitants have become more robot than man to survive the harsh world. And it is an improvement to the last issue. I think this guy also looks like one of the Thundercats. I think this might be before that too, but interesting. There is just like, and I think I called that out last time too, interesting change of like this line art is like so thin, and then you get like, this is so thick. This almost looks like a different hand here. Yeah. I do think there's some good dynamic angles and panels. Just this line art I think could have used, I wonder if it was drawn smaller and then they're blowing it up almost. There's just, the lines are very thin. It also, almost like some of it looks like it was drawn with like a ballpoint pen. And this is like another face where I feel like, you know, there's parts where I think you can see like maybe this is like a swipe of something, just at least this head. That's such a funny like arm coming around the panel to be holding the gun. It's like this little tiny arm growing off of him. But this face looks like really well referenced because I really like this kind of like shadow that's going down the nose and down the chin. I think that's really well observed, but I just always kind of wonder when we're seeing those kind of parts, like maybe it's being referenced from something. So we see some of the robots get an up angle. This also kind of reminds me of, I guess it's that leg shape, but kind of reminds me of those robots in TMNT, those little, but they're mousers, they're like a lot smaller. But cool sci-fi designs. I like these kind of like little informed pieces of the world. I think that's enough to kind of give us a sense of place. Dramatic angles. We're getting some fighting, get some kind of like scary kind of horror imagery of like these robots having like human faces. And I think, it's interesting, and this was like a topic or a fear in 78, and it's continued to be a fear, and maybe even more now with AI and everything as well. But interesting story as it goes. You guys can read it if you'd like, be pausing. But we just end on this, the reveal of who they are, that they used to be more man, and, next, beneath the masks, behind the smiles. But really does remind me of some like Jim Starlin, Adam Warlock kind of storytelling or imagery. We then go to Radio Comics by Bonk, and it's Invasion of the Radio Men. And I think where I was saying some of this line art looks like it was drawn maybe smaller. This Bonk style is just so thick and nice. I think it like the contrast of how you see like even on the screen, like some of this is like it's kind of fading out, like it was almost barely printed, and this is so sharp and bold. Once again, reminds me of like Ralph Snart kind of style. Love the big noses and how it's like hanging over the panel. So smart. But this is like, this guy's walking, and then he's confronted by this radio robot, and he says, "Ha ha, Fleshoid, your time is up. Listen now to the way the world ends." And then it's radios attack, and kind of, I wonder if this is kind of like a reference of like Mars Attacks or something like that as well. Really, really cool. I love this. This is such a cool splash of the just being like bombed and attacked by these big old robots. And I love these kind of robot design too, just so like blocky, just simple shapes, knocking down the buildings, marching in formation. They almost look like buildings themselves, just like kind of seeing like, oh, that's the scale that we would be fighting them on. Yeah, just great stuff. He's like smushing this human, his eyes popping out, and these guys are trying to fight him with guns, but it's not going to be enough. And I believe it's like, so it's like, he says, "Listen as the world ends," and he hits click. And it's like, this is like a radio telling of it, so it's all in his imagination. We get this great like transition from a regular balloon, or a regular circle as it starts to kind of warp. And then this warps as well to kind of tell us that this whole splash is like a thought balloon. That's really, really cool use of a transition and just a panel to a panel relationship kind of thing. Really great use of the page. So he clicks it, lets him imagine it. It's also kind of probably a reference to that old scare that happens when there was the War of the Worlds story told on the radio, and a bunch of people thought it was real and that we were actually being invaded. So he's imagining this, and then snap. And so like his brain snaps. He's so scared, and he can't stand it. Good grief, shut up. No more. And so it's just the robot is just telling him how short his time still is, and this is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper. See ya on the scrap heap. Heh heh. So nice little tongue-in-cheek ending of just like putting the fear into humans, how he defeated them with an idea almost, not even like having to do the thing. He was so scared. He's like, "Oh, I can't take it. You guys win." And that's the end. And this is another place where we see, I think Bonk said this, or had this written last time too, but this Brainstorm Studios, and I think that's where Bryan Talbot also had that credited. So I wonder if they had a studio where they're all working together, like looking at each other's pages, or if that was just something they formed for this. But that would be so much fun. Just be sitting in a room, looking at what all these guys are doing, inspiring each other, just trying to make the best work they can. And so this might be why you guys found this episode, why you were looking for Near Myths 2. Here we go. This is the first published appearance of Grant Morrison, and its time is a 4-letter word by Grant T. Morrison. Later, they would drop the T at least, just be Grant Morrison. And this is actually written and drawn by Grant Morrison. And I think that always has to really inform you of how a creator works, how their mind works. And I think there's a lot of great examples of writers that can also draw, or maybe started their career as artists. Brian Michael Bendis was an artist. Grant Morrison, Alan Moore. A lot of the greats would also be while you're writing the comic page, you yourself need to find a way to envision it. So you're maybe doing thumbnails with your script, or you're just kind of thinking about this visually. And maybe it's not even something, I don't believe that Grant would even send their thumbnails to the artist. There is a really great back matter in the back of Arkham Asylum that has all of Grant's thumbnails for that issue. But I don't know if a lot of these artists even technically would send their thumbnails to the artist. It's more just for them to figure out how they want to write the page and thinking of the page and not just trying to be like, oh, panel 1, we need to get all this in there. It's like when you're thinking as an artist, you can actually think of okay, how do I pace this out? So I think it's really important to see how Grant started. And I think you see there's so many of the classic Grant Morrison tropes in here. A big reason for me wanting to do this series and wanting to even talk about this is a lot of the time when I see people discuss or review this story, time is a 4-letter word, a lot of the times it's just kind of written off as incomprehensible. It's just it's just a bunch of noise, doesn't really make any sense. But I think there is something here. It's just kind of this is only a 4-page, or no, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a 6-page story. And really, Grant Morrison is shoving a lot in there. And I think some of the meaning is getting lost in the subtext and the imagery. But there's a lot of the Grant Morrison themes in here that would later go on to be in Invisibles, even just Batman, Superman, just all of their work. I mean, Grant kind of goes, Final Crisis. There's a lot of those time elements, multiple stories being told at the same time. There's also some gender roles in here and exploring that. So yeah, time travel, cyclical storytelling, and magic are some of the 3 big themes that are in here that would go on in Grant Morrison work. There's 3 stories running at the same time. We don't see the third. These are just the 2 stories. First on this page, we get this Bronze Age story with this Weaver, Corn Maiden, and Beechtair, this guy at Stonehenge. And then this is in the future, and the future being 1982. This was published in 78, so it was still the future then. We get the date here. But this is in the third kind of stories in the future with Quentin and Dana. And those are also names that Grant would kind of end up using later, Quentin and then Dane in the Invisibles, my namesake. And so the third story that gets introduced on this page is the medieval story with the Corn Maiden, another Corn Maiden, kind of the passing down of this generational knowledge of what maybe not is traditional Christian model, kind of looking at how those themes of religion and storytelling and stuff kind of change with the times. But so we get another Corn Maiden and her murderer and a guy who sexually assaults her. But we kind of have these 3 stories building at the same time. The big kind of call to action, or the thing that all 3 relate around, is Stonehenge. And it's said that, or in mythology or just in storytelling, would be that the stones are able to store energy, and certain stones would vibrate and make sounds when struck. And so this is a place where the energy is stored and builds up, and it builds up to the conclusion of the story where the loop of time comes to a close and then it begins again and again. So kind of going into that magic and cyclical storytelling, like I was saying. So we get this intro of that first Bronze Age kind of story of this Corn Maiden and this hunter kind of guy who come, and she's kind of performing some kind of ritual. He comes to stop her and being like, what are you doing? This is not the place for this. I also wanted to look at, there's a bunch of Gaelic names and stuff in here, and just knowing Grant, I know that there's a lot of meaning in there as well. So this guy's name is Beechtair. I don't know if she says it here, but that's his name, and that's in Gaelic. I was looking at a Gaelic dictionary, but it said Beechtair, an observer, a spy, a scout, a critic, reviewer. So he's coming here, casts doubt and blame on this lowly woman in his eyes that has no right to be in this place. This is a place for the druids, and she's coming in with her Corn Maiden magic, her blasphemy, And so then she also says, wait for Comhane. My apologies for just butchering these words too, but Comhane, and says to spare, save, or reserve. So I believe that's she's saying wait for the end of the world, kind of. It's also another name could be husband. So kind of that whole thing, the cyclical nature, this is kind of even some of those themes that were in Bryan Talbot's story, the whole like duality. This is kind of like man versus woman, life versus death kind of thing. And Comhane would be like end waiting for the husband, which would be like, or life waiting for death. But I think this is a really interesting transition, and using a word balloon as a transition. We have this man, kind of mansplaining to this witch or corn maiden, we'll call her, and it kind of fades as he's saying, I've seen the powers change on the old track, and then it fades into what Quentin is saying, and kind of just also pointing out like, things don't change. Like these people are still kind of serving a similar role, even though we're in a more advanced time kind of thing. So it fades, and this guy's just saying some stuff, saying there's new Trixies opening up all the place. Christ, we've completely lost Oxford completely. The chrono overspill swamped a 6-mile radius. And so kind of the big story of here is that like in 1982, time is like collapsing on itself. Like these Trixies or like portals are opening up, and things are just kind of like spilling through or like kind of reverting to an older time. And Dana says, that's time for you, Quentin, old bean. It had to reach a saturation point sooner or later. So just this is the cyclical nature of everything. Everything's going to come back. And so it's like, it's not just isolated cases, Dana. All over the world, we've had to set up refugee camps for overspill victims. It could happen anywhere now. And now, there's a redundant word, just kind of being like, oh, if time is all spilling on each other, what is now? Saying like, okay, we've tried science, we've tried to like fix these things, and now, and you can see there's Grant using that little slash or like almost like a tilde kind of line for that pause there, going from the top of the G to the bottom of the T. Interesting. Just an interesting mark that I'm not familiar with, but maybe it was in 2000 AD in lettering more often, but not something we use as much in American comics or at all. And so saying that, we've exhausted the methods of science, and you, Dana, you're the mistress of sorcery, so they're going to do some sorcery. And this kind of feels like a classic. This would be like a character out of The Invisibles too, embracing her sexuality. I think that's a big part of it, the man versus the woman, what their roles are and how she's kind of taking control back. I think it's probably getting a little lost, but I love this background that Grant did of like, I think there's like some tarot stuff. There's something about a Virgo up here. There's a lot of imagery and messaging laid in here. So that's just, I wanted to call out some stuff because I think this story, and being Grant's first, often gets just kind of cast to the side as being, oh, good first try. But I think there's some stuff in here that we could see what was informing them and what would be later used in other stories. So they're going to go to Stonehenge eventually. Well, we get another introduction here of the kind of like second story in the timeline. We had the Bronze Age, and then this would be like a medieval time, and kind of even just maybe even more like about the Crusades, right? Like I think that's kind of what this timeline is supposed to be. Kind of like the whole idea of like casting out the old ways for embracing like purely Christianity and monotheism, and just like that all the like mythology and sorcery that was so prevalent in like Ireland and Scotland and what would eventually become the UK. This is kind of like about that, how this was being cast out for the embracing of just one way of doing everything. So we get this corn maiden who, it's before the ceremony. She's gonna go in and take a bath, and this knight or this guy comes up with his sword, and he's going to take advantage of her. We then go back to the first story of the Bronze Age. Also, I should call out Grant Morrison had a very interesting lettering balloon style, like how these kind of wispy tails come over. It gets a little lost in some of the line art, like especially here. Like there'd be like a tail that would have connected over here. And so it's just very interesting. I wonder what informed that kind of lettering, or just maybe the idea of wanting to stand out. And so Beach Dare is coming here. He's asking the corn maiden, what are you doing here? Weaving. She's like weaving time, magic. And so I think it starts to become more apparent, but these three stories all really center around like the gender roles. In the first story, we have the weaver and the hunter, and as he's coming here, he's trying to put the woman in her place, but all is preordained, and her part is to help bring it all to a close at the beginning, kind of bringing the circle back. And two is the maiden and the noble, and he sees her purity and desires her. And although her connection to the corn mother damns him, it's like he's brought in by that temptation. And this is the biggest spike of energy. So we're going to see his attack happen. He gets in the water and he's going to try to make him hers, even though, she has this false god to him. She says, "You must not touch me, Lord. To touch the maiden before her time is to die," as he grabs her. Just kind of the contrast of the belief systems and him taking what he desires rather than letting her have her power, right? And so this is where they're leaving to go to Stonehenge. They know that this is like the final place. He's unsure where they're going, but she knows. She's got intent. And here we also, so it's like we get that contrast of, this is all kind of a UK Britain story, and also obviously Stonehenge kind of ties that all together, but Beach Dare is saying, "I have traveled this whole land of Albion," and so that's like also hitting that this was like before things were kind of brought together under this united kingdom as well. So even before like the age of maybe like a King Arthur. So we get this assault. We'll see soon. Heathen slut. So he's still shaming her as he's giving her the ultimate shame and taking something away from her. And then we're also seeing Beach Dare, he's about to strike this sorceress down. "I gave you fair warning, woman." And then it's too late. So we get these two kind of like, this is, like I was saying, the biggest spike of energy around this area and just like this assault. And then we also get this attack as he's coming at the original Corn Maiden. And she says, "It's too late, Beach Dare. Look, Comhain, the end has come." And so we get this light, this big like Trixie is spilling over here too at the original event, the original incursion. And so like for both of these, we're just seeing the woman is still only seen as an object to take and destroy. Both of these women to them, and even Dana in the current day, they all worship like pagan ideals, making them heathens. And in the modern world where the woman's role is needed and respected, just because they've exhausted everything else, and they're basically like, "Hey, all right, we'll give you a chance, lady," right? Like, you must know something about sorcery. So it's still even like, okay, it's respected to maybe solve this, but it's not even, the first thing they went to try to solve it. So the modern world isn't even as modern as we would hope. And so we kind of get all this coming to a head on these final two pages as the Weaver and the Maiden's connection to the pagan gods and the history and the heartache leave this trail through time that always leads to Dana and leads back here, where as soon as this is back, so we get this, Comhain is coming in the Bronze Age, and then here we're back in 82. They actually get to Stonehenge. I think this is interesting. It looks like Grant must have been working from like an image that they then inked, but it has kind of like that feeling of a high contrast photo. And I probably haven't been saying it enough, but I do think Grant's artwork is really strong. I think they have a really great grasp on the human figure and composition. And I can only imagine that if Grant would have continued to draw comics, they would have just gotten better and better. So as soon as they get to Stonehenge, this is where she was like, maybe the stones are waiting for something. Coincidence, conjunction, a trigger. And then she says, "Oh, I feel something here. It's almost dawn." And, it's kind of like Comhain is here coming as the dawn as well. It's like the sun coming over the horizon. She feels it and she says, "Oh, Quentin, get away quickly. I was wrong. Quick, before it happens. And so again, that cyclical nature, he killed this woman that he assaulted. We see the blood on the sword, and then he runs, he flees the scene. This is like the biggest spike of that energy, that hate and the death and the attack of the actual Corn Mother, or at least one of her children. And so then and the printing is it's interesting to see how this looks a little different on the pure white versus the newspaper too. But we get back to here. I have to imagine this is maybe in the current time, or it's what Beach Dare is seeing. He's seeing like the horizon line come up, and she's the Weaver, the original Weaver, is saying, "What do you see?" He says, I see a tower where no tower could be." And so he's seeing like a view of modern time. I think Grant also did something similar like this in The Invisibles later. But Dana realizes, "Quentin, it's us. Oh my God, we were the trigger. Completed the pattern. It's us." And so they kind of fulfilled those roles, the gender roles and they came here. They completed the event. We also see that our murderer also. This is him arriving at Stonehenge. It's a little confusing here of that transition to here, but you kind of tell it's him because he has this this medallion, and then we see Stonehenge in the background. And so the accumulated time store of Stonehenge breaks loose. The rush of energy spans the world, triggering the final chain reaction. Caught on the wind, Dana falls. Blood from nose, ears, tear ducts, the wounds of ghostly weapons gape. His scream forever. And so it's like he is also feeling this incursion event, and we see, I believe this would be the original Weaver here, unless it's, no, actually I think it's Dana, because Dana's the one that's wearing like the jacket or the coat. And so she's kind of then seeing, she's here, and she sees Beach there in the background, so she sees the Bronze Age guy, and then we see that she's also there with the medieval man as he's dying. He's getting struck by this amazing force of sound, and as the universe is kind of compressing. And then we cut back, and now we see that Quentin is actually with the Bronze Age lady. He's also moved to another time. She says, "I am the fire on the high hill. I am the calm swan's daughter. Mother, be here." He says, "Dear God, here, here, here," which is like that happens. And then somewhere, a scent of hawthorn, a sound of falling rain. And so hawthorn was known in Gaelic as being like a tree of magical enchantment, and it was associated with the celebration of Beltane, which was like a religious holiday to what would be like the Druids. And it was like a fairy tree and very sacred. So kind of going back to, like these Druid roots of Scotland and UK or Britain as a whole, and kind of like being tied to that old magic, and what did old magic do, and kind of like fighting against maybe what would have been more of like an establishment. So we get this kind of cosmic clash as all the stories come together. We have the original Weaver, the murdered woman, and then Dana, and these three, it's the full moon, crescent, and then half moon, more like magic and tarot imagery as the universe crashes, comes to a halt and start again, and we get a sound, the falling of rain, the Big Bang happens again, and the universe starts all over again, all to come back to this point again, just playing up that cyclical nature. So that was Near Myths number 2. I obviously spent a good amount of time on that Grant Morrison story, but I just wanted to kind of give that a little bit of a shine to maybe if you haven't seen Grant's first work, and maybe you haven't seen a lot of Grant Morrison artwork. This is a really, really cool artifact, and I'm really glad that I can take a look at this with you guys. And so if you would like, I am also a working cartoonist, and I would love your support. I do a few comics that you can find on my website, danegeorges.com. These are all self-published by me. I've got 3 issues of Doomskull, which is about a ex-supervillain that works at a grocery store with his minion, Bag Boy. I have 3 issues of those. And I'm also finishing up issue 4 right now. But got 3 issues of that. I also have a few horror zines. I've got The Passenger and Sleepless Sights. But just fun black and white zines, a little bit spookier for you. Another spooky one I have is this Hollow zine. Recently was a successful Kickstarter, and I've got a 5-page story in here about my guys Fish and Chip, but also all really great Chicago comic artists, or just artists in general, so really cool publication. That's also on my site. And I've got X-Ray, collection of my 4-panel web comics. And finally, my newest one that I'm going to be posting on there is Jiggly-Bub, which is about a piece of gum that God spat out and landed on Earth. So this will be going up soon. Hope you will check out my work, and if anything, subscribe, check out some of the other videos I've got on Dangerous Comics, and remember to think and read dangerously. I'll see you next time.